It became simply unbearable. Too many hints, too many inconsistencies. Sally and I had been married for 12 years. When we got married, we had every reason to do so, but then everything changed. We both grew up, as they say. For me, that meant settling down and looking to the future. At least that's what I called it. Bar life was wearing me down. The loud music and drunk people were no longer fun. The music was so loud that I couldn't talk, and talking to people was important to me. Drunk people were just drunk. When I stopped drinking more than a couple of drinks a night, their stupid words and actions stopped being funny and witty and just became stupid and meaningless. I thought Sally agreed with me. She seemed to enjoy walks, quiet evenings at home, and gentle sex as much as I did. We stopped going to bars and started doing other things. She seemed to agree with me that quieter, less boisterous entertainment was just as enjoyable. God knows how much less my head hurt the next morning. At least, that's what I thought until her business trips became more frequent. She worked for a cosmetics company and regularly visited clients to promote and demonstrate new and improved products from their line. The commission trips increased from once every 3 to 4 months to the point where, in the last few months, I realized that Sally was flying out somewhere about every 3 weeks. As I began to think about it, I noticed that the nature of the trips had changed as well. At first, Sally would leave for the airport in the morning. Arriving at her destination before noon, she would meet with executives from the company she was visiting over lunch. After lunch, she would answer questions and demonstrate the benefits of the new and improved products. The next day, she would give demonstrations at leading boutiques and department stores, which usually lasted until the evening. Sometimes Sally would give an evening performance, but then she would fly home that same night. She always called me to meet her at the terminal upon arrival, regardless of the time. Now, she would fly out the night before and spend the next 2 days in meetings and demonstrations, probably just as she had before. But she would fly home in the morning or early afternoon after what I came to call her demonstration performances. At first, she would fly in for 2 days, arriving in the morning, staying overnight, and flying home the next day after lunch. Now she was staying for 3 nights and flying out in the morning of the 3rd day, and she didn't seem to want me to pick her up when she arrived. According to Sally, she knew I didn't want to take time off work regularly to pick her up. Now you're probably thinking that I suspected something was wrong because our sex life was suffering, but that wasn't the case. In fact, the nights she came back from her trips were some of the hottest of our lives. And that was one of the things that made me wonder. On some of those nights, she would get inventive. Some of her little quirks became part of our regular lovemaking. What made me seriously wonder about it a couple of months ago was that she wasn't answering when I called her in the evenings. She always called me right after our usual dinner, but she didn't answer when I tried to call her later, say, at 9 or 10:30. Once I called her after midnight, but I couldn't get through. She told me she was very tired after her flight and long days of working with clients and giving demonstrations. According to Sally, she simply didn't answer her phone. If I left her a message, she would call me back the next morning at work, usually around 8:15, right after I arrived. She explained that she needed to rest after her flight, so she flew out a day early. She said she wanted to avoid the inconvenience of late-night flights after a long and hard day of public demonstrations, so she stayed overnight. It all seemed perfectly logical, especially if you assumed that she didn't really want to be home with me. I felt terrible about my doubts, but I couldn't help wondering what had really happened during those 3 nights when she was away and out of contact. I cared deeply about her. Besides, Sally had given me no reason to doubt her love for me. But the situation bothered me. I was jealous and let it affect me, but I felt like I had a reason to be. I couldn't get it out of my head, and it was starting to affect our relationship, whether she realized it or not. Finally, I decided that I had to dispel my doubts, get rid of this burden, so to speak. But I couldn't tell Sally about my suspicions. If they turned out to be unfounded, she would be very angry with me for suspecting her. If they turned out to be true, she would be angry and afraid. Either way, the questions would remain, and nothing would change except that my wife would be angry with me. I felt I had to make sure that my fears were just empty speculation, but she couldn't find out that I was doing this. So when the last trip was scheduled, I arranged for a few days off with my boss. Then I told Sally that I needed to visit one of our suppliers while she was away. I promised to call her at the hotel at the time we usually talked, as I probably wouldn't be back until morning and wouldn't be able to answer her call. Sally flew to Phoenix late in the afternoon. I booked a flight for the morning and arrived early enough to check into the hotel where she always stayed. After changing into clothes she wouldn't recognize, I returned to the airport in a rental car. When she got off the plane, I was standing at the exit in casual clothes, wearing a bright baseball cap and reading the National Enquirer. A tall, handsome man met Sally at the exit and hugged her warmly. I recognized him from a company banquet a couple of years ago. He was the owner of a local distributor for a line of cosmetics that Sally was going to demonstrate. I let them go ahead and headed for the baggage claim area, watching from a distance as they picked up my wife's suitcase. I easily caught up with them and made it to the hotel where Sally and I were staying. I changed into a sports jacket. When my wife entered, I sat off to the side in the hotel lobby and watched her check in. After getting their keys, they both got into the elevator. The man looked tired after a long day. His hair was tousled and wouldn't stay in place. He looked tired, but also very happy to be with Sally. When the elevator doors closed, it was just them and another couple. I watched the floor numbers. The elevator stopped on the 4th and 15th floors. Now I knew that Sally's room was on the 4th or 15th floor. I assumed her room was on the 15th, as she usually chose rooms with a view. 45 minutes later, they were still there, and I started biting my nails. But in the end, it was a business trip, and there was nothing unusual about them discussing the details of Sally's performances for the next 2 days. Glancing at my watch, I saw that it was already 6:15, and it was a little late for an evening call. I walked over to a payphone, dialed the hotel number, and asked to be connected to my wife. The phone rang at least 10 times before the operator came back on the line and said the number was unavailable. I hung up and my stomach started to rumble. I went into a souvenir shop, bought a book on the latest advances in self-improvement, picked up a local newspaper, and returned to my spot where I could watch the elevators. Almost 3 hours later, I recognized the man who came out of the elevator with Sally. He looked better than when I saw him at the airport. In fact, the man walking through the lobby looked like someone who had just taken a shower and had a good night's sleep. His hair was perfectly styled and even looked slightly damp. He definitely didn't look like someone who had just spent 4 hours discussing business. Telling myself not to jump to conclusions, I tossed the self-help book I had been reading into the trash can and went to the payphone to call again. There was still no answer in Sally's room. Returning to my room, I got ready for bed, lay down, and stared at the ceiling. I'm sure I fell asleep that night, but I don't know when or how long it took. It seemed like I tossed and turned all night, staring at the ceiling or out the window. The next morning, after showering, I changed my hairstyle with washable hair dye and put on clothes that my wife wouldn't associate with her husband. Back in the lobby, I called my wife's room again from a payphone. Again, no one answered, but I left a message saying that I had been trying to reach her, that I wouldn't be in the office that day, but that I would call her in the evening after dinner. I knew that her workday would be busy, so I spent the day exploring the city. I was in the lobby when Sally returned that evening. I watched her enter the elevator alone. Then I sat down to wait. After waiting 20 minutes, I went to the payphone and called her. She answered almost immediately, sounding a little out of breath. After telling me she loved me, Sally said she had just returned to her room after a hard day. We chatted about how our days had gone. Mine was pretty made up. She said she was very tired and planned to have dinner at the hotel, then go to bed and maybe read. Whether she planned to read or not, she was going to go to bed early because she had a busy day of demonstrations the next day. I told her I had tried to call her the day before. Sally explained that she had been met at the airport by the owner of the company that distributes their products in the Phoenix area. They had gone straight to his office, and she had checked into the hotel quite late. She warned me that by our time she might be back at the hotel late and not to be upset if she wasn't home when I called tomorrow evening. After that lie, I felt awkward and sank into a chair in the lobby to read the newspaper before dinner. My mood was completely ruined when, 45 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Sally stepped out arm in arm with a man I had never seen before. They were chatting and joking, flirting quite openly, and he patted her on the butt very familiarly as they turned away from me and headed for the parking lot. My rental car was parked on a one-way street in front of the hotel. I hurried to my car, got behind the wheel, and waited. From where I was sitting, I could see the exit from the hotel parking lot. 5 minutes later, I recognized Sally and her companion as they drove out. Carefully following them, I drove to a steakhouse outside of town. After parking, I waited while they had dinner. And then I realized for the first time that I hadn't really expected to find her here, since I hadn't planned on dinner while I was following her. I knew I was in a pretty depressed state if following her to a steakhouse seemed like fun. An hour and a half passed before they came out. They were giggling and talking loudly. It was obvious to me that my beloved wife had had a few glasses of wine with her dinner. From that moment on, my evening went downhill. They drove to a noisy bar. After waiting 10 minutes, I followed them inside and sat down at the bar where I could see the entire room. They were easy to spot, as they were probably the loudest couple in the place. Sally and her companion were dancing, drinking, kissing in front of everyone, and having the time of their lives. Everyone sitting near them was involved in their fun, and it looked like one big party. One thing was obvious. My wife was very close to her companion. Sitting quietly at the bar, I tried to sip my drink. To my complete surprise, a very attractive woman approached me and struck up a conversation. She was cheerful and sweet, but something didn't add up. I somehow figured out that she worked at the bar and was keeping an eye out for potential troublemakers. I didn't fit in with the crowd of drinking patrons, and her job was to prevent an incident before it started. In the end, she decided that I was a lonely man trying to get over a broken heart. To cheer me up, she pointed out the happiest couple in the room, my wife and her companion. She told me that the woman had come here several times alone, but just 3 weeks ago, Randy, the man she was with now, had driven her home. She had seemed quite unhappy and lonely then, but look at them now. I thanked her for her help, told her I felt better, and that I'd better go home and get some sleep. She had been a great help to me. I returned to the hotel, changed my clothes, and decided to have a cup of coffee in the hotel cafe. I happened to sit where I could see the elevators. Less than 15 minutes later, I saw Sally and her companion entering the elevator to go up to the 15th floor. Before the doors closed, she hugged him, and the last thing I saw that evening was my wife kissing him, the most erotic kiss I had ever seen. When the doors closed, the receptionists giggled as they discussed the scene. There was serious doubt that they were still standing when they reached the 15th floor. I guessed that Sally wanted to show him the view. Now that I knew what car her date was driving, I headed for the parking lot and found it easily. Shining my keychain flashlight through the windows, I spotted an envelope in a manila folder with Randy Hansen's address on it. Now I knew her date's name. But what good did that do me? Out of curiosity, I returned to the payphones to look in the Phoenix phone book. As expected, Mr. Randy Hansen was listed. Randy and Barbara Hansen were listed. Looking at my watch, I saw that it was already after 11, but I dialed the number anyway. The phone rang 7 times before a woman finally answered. I asked if I could speak to Randy. She said he had gone out to dinner with an important client and wouldn't be back until early the next morning. I apologized and said I had a problem but didn't realize how late it was. I said I would call back in the morning and hung up. Now I was pretty upset and called Sally on her extension. The phone rang a dozen times before I hung up. Going up to my lonely room, I waited another 20 minutes and called her again, letting the phone ring. After waiting half an hour, I dialed the number again and again and let the phone ring. Then I waited another half hour before calling again. On about the 12th call, Sally picked up, sounding slightly drunk and very annoyed. Speaking through a towel pressed against the phone and trying to sound drunk, I made her an indecent proposal. Sally gasped, and I heard the phone being yanked out of her hands. An angry male voice came on the line, warning me to leave the lady alone or he would kick my ass. I paused, then decided, "Oh, sorry, Randy. I didn't know you were with Sally tonight. Tell her hi. I'll call her later." Then I hung up and went to bed. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I decided I had nothing left to do in Phoenix. I checked out of the hotel early, probably before my wife woke up. I drove to the airport, got on the first plane in the right direction, and by noon, I was home. I didn't call Sally that evening. If she wasn't home, there was no point, and if she was home, my call would have made her wonder. To my surprise, I woke up early from a restless sleep and the sound of a taxi pulling up outside the house. Sally was dragging her bag into the house. I met her in the living room as she was hanging up her coat. She stood there looking at me, looking very tired and upset, then rushed over and hugged me. I hugged her formally, burying my face in her neck so she couldn't kiss me. My God, what a surprise! "Did your boyfriend kick you out?" I asked, pulling away from her and trying to sound at least half joking. "My boyfriend lives here," she replied, clinging to me even tighter. "Maybe I can talk him into letting me sleep in his bed." "You must be tired, Sally. Why don't you get some sleep?" I said. I was just about to get up and make breakfast. "Would you like something to eat before you take a nap? You don't have to be in town until noon, so no one will be waiting for you at work. Take advantage of the opportunity to rest. I've noticed that these business trips really wear you out." Sally looked at me intently. "What about me, dear? I'd like a cup of tea while you eat. Is something wrong? You seem distracted." "We need to talk, Sally, but let me eat first. Are you sure you don't want anything?" Although I had no appetite, I decided it would be better to eat something now. Judging by the way my life was going, I wouldn't be hungry later, and if I waited for my appetite to return, I might starve to death. I put the kettle on and made some eggs with sausage and toast. While the sausage was frying, I poured orange juice for Sally and myself. Sally sat silently, sipping her tea while I ate. I knew we would talk soon, but I didn't want to. I was determined to do what I had to do, but I just didn't want to. After I had struggled to eat the tasteless food, I leaned back in my chair and looked at my wife. She was still one of the most attractive women I had ever met. Bright, intelligent, and witty, she had been a pleasure to spend time with all these years. At moments like this, I missed smoking. Neither of us wanted to start the conversation, and a cigarette, or better yet, a pipe, would have been very comforting right now. Finally, I said, "We need to talk, Sally. Let's go to the living room. It's more comfortable there. Better yet, go take a shower, wash off your fatigue, and when you're ready, come back." Sally got up silently and headed for the bedroom, taking her suitcase with her. When she came back in her bathrobe, she looked fresher, but there were wrinkles and shadows on her face that I hadn't noticed before. She glanced at the clock and asked, "Aren't you going to work today?" "No, I took the whole week off," I replied. She looked at me intently, piecing together the different facts. We sat in silence for a few minutes, studying each other, not wanting to speak. "Sally, did you know that Randy was married?" I asked. She flinched and her face turned pale. We sat and stared at each other for a while longer. "What was his name?" I began again. "Your contact at Lady Cosmetics. Wasn't it Conrad? Conrad Jones? I remember you once told me he was gay. Is that true?" Sally flinched again and sighed unevenly. Her eyes were wide and fixed on me. She still hadn't said a word. I let the silence hang in the air. In the quiet living room, it grew louder and louder. Finally, I shrugged mentally and decided to get it over with. I didn't want to do this. "Honey," I said, looking at the floor, "I love you, and I probably always will. But I can only believe that you don't want to get married. At least not to me." Sally sighed sharply and started to speak, but I just ignored her and continued. "We discussed what marriage meant to us before our relationship became serious, when we were just dating. At the time, I thought I was infringing on your femininity. We agreed that when two people make a lifelong commitment, it's a contract. No open marriage, because that kind of marriage means that most of the promises won't be kept, whether it's commitment, fidelity, call it what you will. At the time, we believed that each partner should be willing to meet the other's needs. If that was impossible, we agreed to talk about it. If those needs were deemed reasonable, we believed that the person who wasn't meeting them wasn't willing or able to truly commit to the marriage. If one partner couldn't or wouldn't meet the other's needs, it was time to seriously consider whether we should stay together." I lifted my head and just looked at her. Tears were streaming down Sally's face, and she covered her face with her hands. "Vernon, I love you. I'm sorry. We can talk. You can help me. Please, Vernon." "Sally, did I not meet any of your needs? Was I a bad husband?" She shook her head vigorously. Tears filled my eyes. I tried to hold them back. "Sally, I trusted you completely. Now I wonder how long it took me to see the truth, but I'm sure you've been using your trips for entertainment for a long time. I'm not asking you to tell me when it started. I definitely don't want to know the whole story. It doesn't matter how long you've been cheating on me. What matters is that you did it. I couldn't believe what I saw, and I was so ashamed of my suspicions that I felt the need to prove that my suspicions were wrong. Sally, I was there when Conrad Jones met you in Phoenix. I saw you get into the elevator. I called you when you didn't answer, and I saw him leave the hotel a few hours after the two of you went up to your room. He looked rested, as if he had just gotten out of the shower. The next day you told me he had never been in your room." Looking at Sally, I saw tears running down her cheeks. "Sally, I was in the lobby when I called you the night before last, when you told me you were very tired and were going straight to bed after dinner at the hotel restaurant. I was in the lobby, maybe 45 minutes after you came down with Randy. I was parked in the steakhouse parking lot while you had dinner with Randy and got a little drunk. When you went to the bar, I followed you and watched you dance and kiss him. A woman pointed at you as a beautiful couple. She said he had met you on a previous trip and that it was wonderful to see two people who loved each other so much. I was in the cafe when you two got into the elevator. Everyone who saw you wondered if you made it to your room before having sex, and most of them discussed it loudly and giggled. I checked Randy's car, found his home phone number, and called Barbara, his wife. She said she was home alone and that he had gone out to dinner with an important client. I called you while you were entertaining Randy in his room. Randy threatened to beat me up for bothering a lady. How long was that, Sally? It must have been around 2 in the morning. I just sat there looking at my wife. Her face was pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. Vernon, my God, forgive me. I don't know why I did it. Please, it won't happen again. You're my husband, my love. We've built a life together, and that's all I want. Our life together is my real life. For some reason, I thought what I was doing was a game, and it would never become part of my real life. What can I do to make up for what I've done? Anything, just tell me. Woman, I can't think of anything that could make up for what you've done. You got bored, and your curiosity about someone else's little fleshy tube made you completely betray me. A man invades a woman with that tube. When we say he takes her, it's appropriate. You asked me many times to take you, to invade you, to conquer you. There are women who behave like dominatrixes. They actually take on the traditional male role, but that's not you. You allowed yourself, my most precious possession, to belong to another man. I have carefully, sometimes painfully, kept my vow to you, and kept your man exclusively yours. I agreed and still agree that a man is his wife's property to the same extent that a woman is her husband's property. I have kept that vow. Looking into her eyes, I added, I have to ask, Sally. You never gave me any indication that I wasn't satisfying you in bed or in any other area of our life together. You made me believe that it was impossible to satisfy you more than I did, but at the same time, you made some improvements in our sex life. I don't think that's a bad thing, but now I'm curious where you found these new little touches. Was I really not enough for you? Sally sobbed. No, Vernon, never. You're the best lover I've ever had. I just got tired of leaving so often. Please, honey, what can I do to make it up to you? Just tell me. I'll never do anything like that again. It was just to pass the time. It just happened. I love you. I've never loved anyone but you. I don't think I could ever love anyone else. Sally, I can't think of anything that would allow me to trust you. Thank God we don't have children. I'll move out as soon as I find an apartment. Fortunately for us, we lived on one salary and put the rest in the bank, so you shouldn't have any financial difficulties, just like me. But now is not the time to discuss the division of property. But for the record, when the time comes, I would like to split everything in half. I sighed and said, If you're serious about saving our marriage, we can stay in touch. Continuing, If you're serious about saving our marriage, don't go on dates. I'm not going to make any promises to myself. Right now, the very thought of any kind of relationship with anyone makes me shiver. Your success in not sleeping with other people is much worse. Sally, I'm going for a walk. I can sleep in the guest bedroom until I find an apartment. Maybe later today we can go to the bank and open separate accounts, at least for savings. But we can discuss the details later if you want. Then I took my coat and left the house for a long walk. I didn't want her to see my tears.